Today, we will take you from this to this. I'm Nick here with the team at Grocket, and back again we're diving into the topic of caged. When we think about cage, we typically think about these. But what if I told you it doesn't stop there? Oh no, no, no. I will show you a simple method of how to change these chords into bar chords and how they fit into a pattern or structure. Stay tuned for that later. Changing these cage shapes into bar chords is very easy. Once you see it, you'll never be able to see the fretboard the same again. If we go back to the open position, which is anything in the first 4 frets, and play these cage shapes as normal just to get familiar with them. If you have those down, the next step is pretty easy. All you have to do is refashion your original cage shapes by repositioning your fingers. What this entails is putting your first finger behind the nut and reforming those shapes as you would with the other fingers. It may feel difficult at first to stretch your fingers in those sort of ways, but over time your tendons will get used to it. The reason why we're doing this will be apparent soon, but we'll just go over those shapes and how they're reformed. Let's apply this method to the C shape and reform it. It looks like this. You should have your pinky finger on the 3rd fret of the A string, and you reform the C shape with the other fingers. So the 3rd finger on the 2nd fret of the D string, and lastly, the 2nd finger on the B string, which should look like this. Next, we move on to the A shape and repeat the process. Here is what the normal A shape looks like. Same as before, but you put your first finger behind the nut and reform the A shape as normal. Using the open A string, the 2nd finger of the 2nd fret of the D string, and the 3rd finger below that on the 2nd fret of the G string. And finally, the pinky on the 2nd fret of the B string. Now with the G shape, it's a little bit more stretchy, but we'll get onto how to play that later. Here is how it looks normally. We now apply the different fingering by putting the first finger behind the nut, and it should look like this. We place the 3rd finger on the 3rd fret of the low E string for the beginning of the G chord, and then we reform the rest by placing the 2nd finger on the 2nd fret of the B string. Lastly, we put the pinky on the 3rd fret of the high E string. This gives you the G chord without the first finger. Don't worry, we're going to get into the reason why we're doing this, but let's just finish the last 2 shapes. Let's do it with the E shape again, and this is what it looks like normally. And this is what it looks like with the first finger behind the nut. To recreate this shape, we'd first put our first finger behind the nut and recreate it as usual. Then we use our other fingers, namely the 3rd finger on the 2nd fret of the A string, the pinky finger on the 2nd fret of the D string, and finally the 2nd finger on the 1st fret of the G string, recreating it without the first finger. Maybe some of you can see where this is going, but stick around to see exactly where it ends up. On to our last shape to demonstrate, which is the D shape. Now we recreate it without the first finger like we did all the other ones. We put the first finger behind the fret as usual, and we put the 2nd finger on the 2nd fret of the G string, the pinky of the 3rd fret of the B string, and finally the 3rd finger on the high E string. Now we have fully recreated these, it's time to tell you why we did this. So by now you should have recreated all of these with your first finger behind the nut. The reason why we did that is if we used the first finger as a bar and shift it up to the 5th fret and made any of the previous shapes, for example the E shape, can see that we're using the quote-unquote E shape, but it's no longer an E chord because it starts on the A note. So we are using an E shape A chord. You can do this with all of the other shapes anywhere on the fretboard. This is why the CAGED system is very powerful for teaching you your bar chords all over the neck, and it's very quick to do so. So now, with all of that knowledge, you have all of your bar chords just by recreating it with the first finger behind the nut. Congratulations! Now, the best way to utilize the functionality of the CAGED system, to understand where the root notes are in each shape, and to take a mental note of what string these root notes occur within these shapes. So when you come across the string you are on, you can formulate the shape that you need. Let's take a deeper look. If we take a look at each shape, we can see where the root notes are. This is important if we want to recreate these shapes anywhere on the fretboard, or see ourselves with fingers on a particular string and wanting to jump from shape to shape very quickly. Let's start with the CAGED chords and shapes within the open position. We will go through all of the shapes and learn where the root notes are, which is very important. With the C shape, the first root note is on the first note of the shape, on the 3rd fret of the A string, and on the 1st fret of the B string. The important thing to note with these shapes is which string these root notes occur on. So we can safely say that any root note that's on the A string or the B string, you can generate a C shape, with the A string going backward towards the headstock and with the B string going forward towards the bridge. Let's take a look at the A shape. With the A shape, the roots of the chord are based on the open A string and the 2nd fret of the G string. This means that if you can find a root note on the A or the G, you can formulate an A-shaped chord. Now, if we look at the G shape, in this shape there are 3 root notes. The first is on the low E string on the 3rd fret, the second is on the open G string, and because the low E string and the high E string are the same, then you get the 3rd octave on the high E string. So it's safe to say that if you have a root note on the low E, the G, or the high E, you can visualize a G shape. Moving on to the E shape, which also has 3 root notes similar to the G shape. If you look at the diagram, you can see that the first root note is on the low E string, the second is on the 2nd fret of the D string, and as before, because they are 2 E strings, the last one is on the high E string. So you can visualize an E shape from both E strings and on the D string. And finally, let's check out what's going on with the D shape. Here is the D shape. In the D shape, we have 2 roots, one on the D string and one on the 3rd fret on the B string. So when you're on the D or B string, you can visualize a D shape. Now, when I said earlier that you've learned all your bar chords, that is true, but you still need to learn your root notes and your names of your notes over the fretboard to make it useful, which would be another video entirely on how to learn notes and things. I do believe though, after what I've shown you, you should be able to do an E-shape A chord from the information that I've provided. And how you would do that is you'd find the A note on the low E string, and then you would reformulate the E shape, giving you the chord that you needed. The same is true for all of the other shapes, but that isn't all there is to the CAGED system. In the next section, you'll see that something that really helped me understand the fretboard is that CAGED isn't just a name for the sake of it. It's actually a sequence of chord shapes, which allows you to play the same chord in different voicings and find them pretty fast. It enables this. What this is demonstrating is that each CAGED shape flows into each other and follows each other, and they are linked. This enables the visualization of the fretboard as areas within chord shapes. It enables you to be able to place your finger anywhere on the fretboard and, using your previous knowledge of where the root notes are within the shapes, generate a chord going towards the bridge and in reverse towards the headstock. For example, a C shape can go towards the nut with a C shape, but it's also the starting point for the A shape. And a C shape can go backwards into a D shape because that's how the shapes repeat. And if we start at the A shape can go towards the bridge as an A shape, but it can also be the starting point or the framework for the next G shape. And it can go backwards from that same root into a C shape towards the nut. And a G shape can be the starting point for the next E shape going towards the bridge. It can also be going backwards, the filler part, to the A shape. The E shape can be the starting point to going back into the G shape towards the nut. And if you go an octave higher, you can actually reach the D shape. And finally, the D shape can be shifted into the C shape if you go towards the bridge, and it can also be the octave counterpoint to the E shape. And then you find yourself back at the top of the CAGED sequence, starting all over again. This can be very useful if you want a different voicing of the same chord without feeling lost. The same approach can be done with scales and arpeggios, but because this video and the scope of this video is based on bar chords, that will be another video entirely. So my hope is that this video has given you a lot of food for thought, and it helps you with an extensive look at bar chords and how to use the CAGED system with them. Hopefully you've had a good 3-course meal. Yum yum. If you have made it this far, I want to express my gratitude, as there are many more videos to come. My wish is that you stick around and you give the video a like and subscribe. Post what your thoughts are in the comments section. And if you're interested in how this video got started, here is a video that you can check out that started off the series on the CAGED system, going through the pitfalls and misunderstandings of what the CAGED system actually is. Very good video, you should check it out. So that's all from me. I'll see you in the next video.